What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Accounting Flow podcast brought to you by Financial Sense. This podcast is dedicated to taking a deep dive into accounting firm workflow and processes. Each episode, we will spend 20 minutes interviewing actual accounting firm owners just like you, uncovering specific processes that firm owners and operators encounter on a daily basis and discuss ways to improve them. Let's go. Today on Accounting Flow, we've got Chad Davis. What's up, Chad?
Hey, Rom. It's good to see you. Last time we chatted was at Bridging the Gap over in Chicago.
It was. We had a great time. And your daughter was there. It was awesome. It's great to see her present at a conference.
It's funny. And your brand new hats were just released, and you were giving those out. I'm in awe because I didn't get a hat, and I'm just I'll try to represent today with this one. But congratulations on all things hat and firm related for you too.
Oh, appreciate that. I'll make sure I put one in my bag for you for QuickBooks Connect.
Thanks, man.
I'll wear awesome. It. Well, I know a lot of people in our space have heard of Chad Davis. They've heard maybe a bit about your life and your story, but can you just give us the elevator pitch on who is Chad Davis and what are you doing?
I'm gonna have to use ChatGPT for this one. Summarize in 2 sentences. I'm not. Let's see. The really short version is I have a really fun firm in Nova Scotia or in Canada called LiveCA. It's been like our baby for the last 10 years building, and sort of halfway through working in that with my business partner and everybody that works there, we decided that while remote work was great and it was the fundamentals of sort of how we set up the company, we kind of just wanted a little bit more, and we ended up kind of leaving Nova Scotia, which is where I'm from, and we already had a house, and we left in 2018. One for a first small trip, and then second for on the trip we're still on, living in an RV, just kind of traveling around Canada and the United States. So 2 things.
Okay, so you're running from, what's the firm size and who do you guys serve?
Yeah, so firm has gotten up to 110 people, and just over the last couple of years have made some changes, and right now we're right around 60 or so. So and has been every size in between there. So that's it, and we serve typically companies that have a bit of complexity in their sort of daily ops. So where the sort of tax and tech meet in a complicated environment, where maybe other firms don't want to touch those type of companies, or maybe they've outgrown their capabilities and would like someone that's kind of been there, done that. We cater to those sort of $2 million to $20 million companies that they're just kind of looking for that rigor around their sort of internal processes.
Yeah, that's perfect. And to set the stage around a conversation of managing remote work and managing a remote team, is your team primarily Canada-based? Are they dotted throughout the world? Where's your team at?
Yeah, I mean, this is a debate. Every single person's in Canada, and I know almost every accountant that we know is outsourcing. It's not something that's in our plans, and we'll kind of keep people in Canada, and it's kind of been working now. But everything in life, you learn to kind of run with the trend of the moat. There's no wrong way to do this, so just kind of sticking to what you're comfortable with, and what works is really the sort of mantra that we've worked on over the last few years anyway. And excited to kind of keep it that way for a little bit, but also excited at the possibility of what this means down the road.
All right, so everybody's in Canada, and my Canadian geography is not great, but I do know that Canada is quite large. I suspect they're all over Canada.
That's funny. Yeah, they are. So pop quiz. What do you think is the smallest province in Canada?
You should have asked to name a province in Canada. I would Nova Scotia.
Close. It's PEI, Prince Edward Island, which is very close to. It's like New York to Rhode Island, kind of close. Very, very close.
Okay, and you do have people in PEI?
We do, yes. Hi, Alana and Katie, and anyone else that's there too now. So yes, there's people in almost every province, and we have. I mean, my Canadian geography of the north is not as it's probably about as good as yours is of the regular Canada. So we don't have any people up in like the north
Sure.
with all the snow, but yeah, in every province, actually, except Quebec, which
Ah,
is under different wow, this is turning boring. um which is like where they have a different system for employment, and it's just a little bit different than the rest of Canada from a regulation perspective. So I'm sure you have a state or two like that, but for us, that's the one we've kind of stayed away from, but open to it in the future if we need to.
okay, copy. So Canada is large. You have employees all over Canada, and you have had over the years, you've had to implement a process, a methodology of communicating and managing this team. How did you start out on the path of engaging a remote workforce? And I would love to hear kind of the story over the last 10 years of where you guys are at today. So let's start at the beginning.
Okay. Well, what about for context with other people? Like, you're getting off the hook now. You don't get to talk about yourself. So first, let's do just the 2 second who's Roman, and then how big and size of your firm too, because that's the polite thing to do. We can't just skip over you. Come on.
Sure, sure. So I'm Roman, the founder of Full Send Finance. We serve seed through Series B stage companies, primarily in technology and e-commerce. We have a small but mighty team of four dispersed employees. So we're also managing a remote team and learning from folks like you on how to hopefully do that well.
Yeah, or learning what not to do. Excuse me for the cough. Yeah, it's funny, like, you do sort of look sometimes outside for inspiration, but I almost found like every accountant we've talked to over the last little while is like they're still charting their own path, right? They left something that wasn't working for them, or there was just a better opportunity in doing something on their own. They start up a firm, and like they figure out how they like to communicate and what type of clients they want to work with and what ideals and values they want to instill inside of their company. So I don't know, it's kind of funny. Like, kind of growing up, I never really, when I listen to podcasts like this, I was like, oh, I'd love to see what they learn, but like always with a grain of salt, and
Yeah.
looking at it through the lens of, well, that was them, and like the culmination of all of their decisions and all of their mistakes, you know probably won't be even close to the same trajectory or story. But either way, it's like kind of nice to hear like what did work and what didn't work for just that kind of water cooler conversation. So I hope that's where we go
Yeah.
today, and not try to be too prescriptive.
Yeah, completely. And, I think, based on what you described, what I've tended to do is take my own experiences of what I liked and disliked in other firms and impose that on our firm through the lens of like, this is what I would have liked if I was an employee at this company. And that's not always the right answer either, because not everybody's like me, which is a godsend. Like, it's just fantastic that not everybody's like me. But I tend to design it through my own lens of trying to make sure if I was in that seat, I would be happy. But is that how you were thinking about it as well at first, or how did you draw inspiration on that front?
Oh, it's completely selfish. So kind of like through like, oh, we all do that. For me, I was like being in the Cayman Islands of all places, and had a great job and a great friend group and incredible boss, and the opportunity to work remotely and be with our new daughter at the time, who was still in belly at the time we made the decision to leave. We ended up in her. It's like dumbest decision socially that you could possibly make. But it was just to be at home, and like that was so. And for my business partner, it was like, hey, wanted to live in a different country for a little while and visit different places. So I think just having that support system of like another founder, another person that you can walk through in the very beginning is super valuable, and can imagine isn't as lonely. You have to do it all by yourself. So that's one of the keys early on, was just to be at home. And I mean, didn't really like driving into the office if I had to go. And, like, did it for a decade or more before, so it was like, well, maybe this is the start of, me doing something for me, and that was the one thing. If I had to, like, put a stake in and say, this is what I'd like a company to stand for logistically, maybe not
Yeah.
philosophically, but logistically, that was the stake. How about you? Do you have one of those stakes that you use for full send?
My stake revolves more around culture and ethos and, just the general mantra of accounting, or the way that accountants are perceived is generally that introverted, lack of personality, lack of authentic connection. And, I can reference John Garrett in this. He's got the book written called What's Your And? And it really alludes to the things outside of work that really compel you to be a better human being, things that you're passionate about. And so my stake is probably more leaning into that side of things. And that's where we often reference, like, hey, what's your full send? What is it that makes you come alive? What is it that you really are interested in outside of work? Because ultimately your life is not an enabler of work. Your work is an enabler of really enjoying life. And so that's kind of how we think about it, if I were to put definition around a stake for me.
I love it. Those are the kind of conversations I'm really interested in. Is so just seeing why people made some of the decisions they made. Really should have got a glass of water before I started. I'm so sorry.
You're good.
Um, cool. So your original question was, I'm always bad at those where there's like the two-parter and like you go back and forth, which I totally interrupted your flow. So sorry about that. It was around getting an idea of in the beginning, sort of. I know you mentioned 10-year story. That's a big one,
Yeah.
but like in the beginning, what was it again where we wanted to touch on?
Yeah. So how did you get started? If you're starting to hire remote employees, what were those either characteristics that you looked for, or maybe qualities that
Oh,
that uh, would lend to a really good remote workforce?
oh, we had no idea for probably years. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I'm so sorry for not having a good answer, but like when we hired who we thought, would help us the most of the candidates that decided to apply to a brand new company with only two people in it. Um, so, um, you know, you don't have a lot of like we didn't have any hiring experience. I don't know if you did. Kind of going into this, and you just learn over time, sort of what works for you at that time of
Yeah.
your firm. And that's why it's so hard to distill things back to like an ethos or something or a creed, or
Sure.
just than just saying like, here's how we operate. It's more just like for the situation that we're in, here are the positions that we're hiring for. These positions will fit into some version of an organization chart that we have today. And like, wouldn't it be great if we could hire people that we like enjoyed working with or had a working style that was conducive like to the progress of the company, but also of our own selves. And when I think back to like, I don't know, like the 10 or 20 or 30 people that like formed what the culture was at the company over the first 5 years, um, they were all just so nice and
Mhm.
like they were very like willing to help. And like in the beginning we used like willingness to help as one of the metrics of scoring someone
Mhm.
on their what we had these things called trial work days, which was getting people in for a couple days and paying them and seeing how they work. But like their ability to help out and to ask questions and to like take coaching and be able to help others was literally like 20% of the whole mark of like
Yeah.
hiring them. So yeah, maybe that's the takeaway, is that if we knew we wanted to grow and we needed an infrastructure of people that we enjoyed working with and at the time filled a need technically and I don't say socially, but like whatever it's called, where you're talking about how you work along each other. Is that culture?
Mhm.
I don't know,
Gotcha.
maybe.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Is just to be helpful. I mean, I can imagine when you're like four people, it's all hands on deck,
Oh,
and
yeah.
you got to be helpful. You can't be that person in the corner that's just like, nope, I'm not touching that. That's an HR thing. I'm like, no, it's actually all of us thing. And
Yeah.
being able to kind of work through that is nice. Now, you can probably have the discipline these days to do something like that and create very healthy roles and things. So I don't want to get away from that if that's,
Yeah.
the type of company you want to build. But I don't know about you, but early days, there's a lot of hands on deck.
There's no job that's too big, there's no job that's too small, and you quite literally have to link arms in order to tackle not only the work that's coming in, but the administrative duties. There's a lot of responsibilities that fall on the plate of maybe somebody whose role is a senior accountant that maybe traditionally doesn't fit under that job description. And so when you're talking about evaluating those early employees, you have to make sure that those people are multidimensional and capable of filling several roles.
I just realized we're like halfway or further along in this. We haven't really gotten into any meat.
Okay. All
probably,
right.
probably should do that.
We can do that. So, um,
Mm.
all right, you mentioned kind of getting to that the first 20 people being really critical as it relates to like setting the foundation. At what point did you and your co-founder have to kind of step back and assess, we need some actual process or actual parameters as to how we operate as a remote firm?
Oh, I think from day one, like you realize it's important and you work through it. But I think you go through a process looking back of personal growth that you probably didn't see yourself going through because the people that operate really well in 100-person plus companies like are not the same people that work really well at 50-person companies or 30-person companies. It's a completely different skill set. And
Yeah.
we kind of like recognize that the skill set that collectively the people like in our firm have is to operate like a 50 to 70 person team adequately well, like
Mm.
where people are engaged and they are like they just want to do their work and have a good life. And like when you're really trying to instill this this idea of like a meaningful life for someone like you mentioned in your ethos, there's a lot of decisions you can make and there's a lot of decisions you can step away from. And if I think back to like the stuff that we really really leaned into, um around that 20 person mark, and like what worked for us operationally was that we carved out budget for non-billable roles that
Mhm.
really formed the basis of why people stayed, why they joined, and kind of kept us afloat. So a couple of those positions are things like, I don't know, like an onboarding manager. Like who has an onboarding manager at 10 people? You know what I mean? Like or 7 people or 4 people. Like you might, right? Because you see how important it is, or it's part of another person's job. We kind of carve that out. We had a sort of head of tech, their first like 4 hires. We had our ops manager. I was just kind of starting to look up when like they were hired, 2016. So 3 years in, we like made an investment into that a little bit more. And if I look back at like the big investments that were made, mid journey so far, it's been around I won't say like middle management, but kind of middle management, like the
Yeah.
support network for everyone. And you know, when you say like you kind of reinvent yourself every 18 to 24 months, it's true if you're growing because
Right.
you need a place to put these people, and career trajectory is a real thing. And like, yeah, you're still figuring it out. So I don't know if that answers it, but it is something that we learned along the way.
Yeah, I mean, the takeaways that I'm listening to are really centric around making sure that there's enough internal support and piping to allow for employees to have a quality experience because there are individuals that take on those ancillary roles that traditionally would fall on, an operator or somebody who is in direct client service. And so by removing those responsibilities, you're enabling a better environment for them to thrive and then progress in their careers, like you mentioned, is so important.
Yeah, and then there's the element of like, well, if you don't have the skills at like a 100-person or 200-person company, like what are the resources out there that you can look to? And in true Zoolander style, like what's hot right now is EOS, right? It has been for a while, but it feels like the pandemic kicked it into high gear for their growth around the US and Canada at least. And like that single decision to hire an implementer for this entrepreneurial operating system was such a weird feeling for us, because we're like, oh, we built this thing so far, like why would we need somebody to come in and tell us about this like wacky system? Like we're not going to follow some formula. We never followed it for 8 years. Why would we follow it now? And like that was a really great ego check, because
Hmm.
like we thought like we were sailing really well, right? We had the maps, we had maybe not the map, yeah, maybe like a is a weird analogy, but like a subpar map, right? And we were all kind of doing our thing, and it was organized, but maybe it wasn't organized in the way that it could have been, so that we would like get to wherever we're going to a little bit more efficiently and with more straight lines.
Yeah.
And like that's what EOS gave us, was like, okay,
Mhm.
here's the path for the straight line, and you'll probably start figuring things out and having better meetings and having more engaged employees if you follow this. But it's going to take probably like a year to work through all the kinks before you start really, really, really seeing it. And
Yeah.
that's what happened.
Mm.
So, like, again, being fully surprised 10 years in, being like, okay, we threw this in, and now it's like, it's a tenet of the whole company's operating is the terminology, how we're approaching meetings, how we're approaching
Yeah.
data. It just changed everything. So just maybe being open to the fact that you will change, and maybe it's not even every year or two, maybe it's every 3 years, or maybe it's every six
Mhm.
months if you're hyper growthing. Just being open to the idea that like your brilliance today is like not your brilliance tomorrow.
Oh man, there's so much to unpack there. But for those that aren't familiar with EOS, it's the Entrepreneurial Operating System, primarily based on a book by Gino Wickman called Traction. And what EOS is effectively a framework for management, for goal setting, and for internal communication, for accountability. There's a whole framework for this. So if you're not familiar with that, go check out Traction by Gino Wickman. And EOS has gained in popularity amongst accounting firms tremendously. And so you kind of matured and graduated to a point where bringing on an implementer is not an inexpensive proposition,
Yeah.
and their whole job is to implement this system for usage in the business, to define roles, to understand accountability, to set goals and cadences and scorecards in order to manage the firm more effectively. And so you've matured into this space of having to instill a true framework for managing this remote workforce.
Look, and to get back to the sort of meat of this, probably the most impactful change we ever made was really leaning in to the value of those 1 or 2 day sessions of the implementer.
Hmm.
Because we had, for those familiar with EOS, there's this exercise called like the first creation of the accountability chart. And that's where you set up not an org chart necessarily, but like where does accountability lay in the organization and at what levels. And when we had created ours on our own, we're like, oh, we got this. Why don't we just like do this before to see what it's like afterwards? Completely different, right? And like subpar. So and as well, like we went through probably for every quarter that we were doing the accountability chart updates, significant changes would happen like every 3 to 6 months. So we're almost like we're in the middle of year two somewhere, and we're still making changes to that accountability chart as we get more clarity on the types of messages and data we want and the rocks and the goals. Like everything is so aligned that I bet you if we had that alignment 5 years earlier, again, we'd be a completely different company, because we managed meetings the way that like people typically do, which is, depending on if they're one-on-ones or not, like there's like a nice standard formula that people are using today with like blockers and wins and like roundups and all that kind of stuff. But with the meetings, if you've never been in a what they call like an L10 or like a weekly or biweekly meeting, there is this cadence of like the personal introductions and the data and the review of the to-dos and the headlines that just you know what you're getting every
Mhm.
single meeting, and you can prep, and if you use systems or software for it, everybody can be involved. And that's what we did when we chose using 90.io to put this in,
Mhm.
was just a very organized way to have all of this stuff together, but also having the meetings be almost enjoyable. And it's like you get through so many interesting topics because you prioritize the most important.
Yeah.
Whereas us 5 years in, we were I don't know. Well, I don't know what we were doing, like, comparably, but while we thought it might have been organized, it wasn't as organized as this. So, I'm a pretty big fan of, like, the effect that EOS has had on us because we were able to kinda check our egos at the beginning.
Yeah. And I would venture to guess that the typical firm runner that is listening to this right now does not have a framework for goal setting, for accountability, for weekly meetings. Firm runners typically go in and out of their weekly meetings, and it's maybe less structured. There's some overarching theme, but that productivity and the time that's allocated to the meeting is likely a lot lower than it could be by utilizing a framework like this. Because, like you said, you can prepare. You have a very specific task and list of things that you're knocking down, and that is driving alignment every single week for what needs to get done today, tomorrow, next quarter, next year.
What are your thoughts of everybody what are your thoughts of most large companies and medium-sized companies bringing people back to the office?
Boy, I'm a millennial. I'm on the fence here because I love in-person work. There is no reason whatsoever that we need to have an office, but we have an office space because I like going to work and having that community there. It's a co-working space. There's always startups and other company owners that are around, and I thrive on that type of energy. Um, that being said, I don't know that I would ever be in a position where I would mandate somebody to come into work because not everybody's like me. And some people really thrive in that more quiet, at home, more comfortable environment. And I'm okay with that. But for companies that are mandating 2, 3, 4 days a week, I think you can run into some really tight, I don't know, just tight situations where employees get really frustrated because there are these not so important things that are being mandated that they disagree with and they churn because of it.
I was reading somewhere that like a firm in the UK was bringing back everyone to the office. They were at 2 days, and then they mandated it to 5 days.
Mhm.
But the majority of their team members are lawyers, and were hired during the remote times. And just the threads on Reddit are so good, where they're just like they know that we're lawyers, right? Like they know this is not going to go well.
I saw something similar. It was a meme, and it was, return to office for the culture, and the picture of
Yeah.
the culture is just a bunch of empty beige cubicles, and it's like, that's not what drives culture.
Yeah, I know. There's all kinds of reasons why it could happen, and I think this is just like the pervasive observation that we're still, when I say we, like remote companies in general are still in the minority, right? Even studies this year are still saying things like 12% of the workforce is remote or something like that. And depending on who you're looking at, I think this was like a McKinsey one, and they were, if you put that into perspective, like even if it's 20%, which it could be, numbers could be as high as 25 or something like that. Probably isn't. They are in just where was I going with this? Oh yeah, it's still in the minority, right? Which is where we're all kind of living, and like it's not the norm. So as soon as like you take something like a world changing event like the pandemic, and then you have you know a lot of people conditioned to work in one way, like as soon as that inertia of their friends bringing people back to work happens, you know oh, everyone's doing it is kind of the thing. And I don't know, there's a subset of workers that can and could do work remotely that are like they're missing out. So we're seeing that now on some job postings where, accountants are being asked to either increase the days or start coming in, and they're looking for options. So like those firms that are still operating have an advantage now. Um, I don't think anybody had an advantage in early 2020. Maybe if you were
No.
already operating that way, but like, yeah, it's kind of nice to see the trends not be like 2% of the workforce is working remotely, and like just that inertia is great to see. I'm glad we're alive for it. I'm hopeful that people find jobs that suit their situation the best, so that if you want to go in for a co-working sesh, you totally can, and everybody's happy. Um, but I think for now, we've picked our lane. We've worked through some of like the biggest challenges to date. I mean, there will be bigger ones, I'm sure, down the road. But you know, if I look back at just like even just this discussion with you, I'm thinking like, well, what did we really say? And it's like, oh yeah, EOS is good. Starting from remote is probably easier than switching to remote. Um, but if I think back to the things that we did that worked, it was like being very transparent
Hmm.
with people about the financials and sharing those every month, openly, right up to like what my business partner and I take home every month. That was nice, because as you endeavor for certain projects or focuses for 6 months or a year, that lens of like where are we at financially is like super super helpful to anybody that's considering if they want to go in that sort of journey with you for the next year or two. And like from an accounting perspective, there's a lot of talk about structure, like what's the best structure, how should you price, what should you like, how should you operate. And every single structure, including all of ours that I've seen, like nothing works well for someone for a really long time. There's always
Yeah.
changes you're making. So I think that mindset of like, all right, this isn't working anymore. Why isn't it working? Oh, okay, for these reasons. What's the most important thing to change? And that's where you start having discussions around. I mean, what are the famous ones now? Pods or no pods? Middle management layers, what your first couple hires should be, like all very hot topics. I don't think there's a right answer for any of them. It's really just what works for you in the moment.
Yeah, and the ultimate theme there is just being open to change. Accountants by nature are so resistant to change that it's an inhibitor to growth, particularly as it relates to evolution of a remote culture. And kind of calling back to the culture of accountability, the infrastructure that you've established, the way that you communicate and promote transparency in the organization are all things that will continue to evolve over time, but will continue to contribute to a really quality remote culture.
I'm sorry. I'm just thinking back to like a funnier story. We once had a new grad join us, and like their parents were so angry that they decided to work for a little old our firm, and they were like a medal winner and like all that kind of stuff. So they wanted to go to the big four, and I just remember the conversations back then were, no, this is a real company. Yes, I'll talk to your dad, that kind of stuff. But like now you don't have those types of conversations. So like coming back to like it's nice to be on this side of history where we're like trying this more and being more open to it. You just kind of laugh at some of those situations.
Yeah, that's hilarious. Yeah, that doesn't happen very much. And I think Gen Z feels very comfortable with relationship building in a virtual environment, and so I think we'll continue to see these trends of leaning into remote work, and you'll see these larger firms start to instill more of that infrastructure to support that in a really quality manner.
If you think about full send, like four people, you mentioned like you're hiring more, it's growing. Like where do you spend your time like the last month or two? I mean, outside of like new family, but like thinking about like your blockers and like what's really on the top of your mind. Like I'd love to kind of hear where your head's at right now with like where you put those resources.
Yeah, so for me, the biggest goal in 2023, bringing on a partner earlier on in the year, bringing on a senior analyst, an accounting director, all of this has been intentionally driven towards trying to get me out of client work, client service, and then next year to get my partner out of client service. The reason for that being is not because I don't want to do it, not because I don't enjoy it, but rather it's trying to angle towards how can I serve my highest and best purpose and skill set to contribute to not only good culture but firm growth, firm strategy, and then start to ideate around how do we evolve, how do we continue to change next year and beyond. Because if I'm spending 30 hours a week on client service, we're not going to be capable of doing that in a really strong manner. And so it's reallocating my time and resources in a way that's more conducive to supporting and growing the team.
Hmm. So the ever popular question. You've got your accounting director piece. What are the next few hires look like?
For us, it's going to be senior accountant or senior analyst.
Hmm.
Uh, then we will probably be looking at an operations hire. But again, like we mentioned earlier in this conversation, everybody's wearing a lot of hats right now, and so there's just kind of this general understanding of, here are the work streams within our company, and you're going to have to be picking up elements of each of these for a period of time. But you talked about career progression. We want to make sure that we're angling every person in the organization towards the areas that they really thrive in and are passionate about, whether it's an industry vertical, a type of work that they're delivering. Maybe it's more finance than it is accounting. Starting to create lanes where people can pursue those journeys.
I love this. I also love the time we're in because you're going to be able to go back in 5 years and like, not that you're gonna rewatch this thing, but like look at some of the things that you've recorded over the years and
Yeah.
like what your focuses were, and there's almost an 80% chance like that something happened, and like there's just something different. And I find myself like just thinking back to like what we thought was important. It was to a point,
Mhm.
right? But I feel like you are more like more aware than I am about what you're building and yourself to be able to kind of be open to those. But for us, we just kind of went with the flow, and
Yeah.
like what worked because we were charging enough to kind of
Mhm.
eat. What's that story like something strategy eats something for breakfast or something eats strategy for breakfast? I forget. It's a quote.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You can look it up. You can Google it.
Yeah,
But
cash
I,
beats
I think it's
strategy.
it's one of those things. I struggle with planning personally. When you talk about US and planning in 1, 3, 5, 10 year increments, that
Oh
is
yeah.
very difficult for me because every single plan I've had in my life, in my career, 3 years out, 5 years out, has changed drastically from the moment I set that plan in place to then 3 years later. And so I struggle with that.
But here's how we might be able to end this off. Like the people that are around you, both as friends and as coworkers and as colleagues, like they do so because of you. So like if you don't ever compromise on those things that make you you, then you typically like will surround yourselves and people will want to stay with like good people, and that's hard to find in this world anymore. So
Yeah.
you keep being you, and like people will gravitate towards that. I know I would.
Well, I appreciate the therapy session. This has been really helpful for me, and I really
Mm.
hope this conversation has been helpful for those out there just learning more about, adopting change and instilling structure and talking about remote work. So I'm super thankful for you in our industry, the impact that you've had, and this conversation today.
Same to you, Roman. It's always a pleasure, and I'll see you at another conference in a couple weeks.
Yes, that's great. I'm so excited about that. If people want to find you, how would they find you? Do you want them to find you?
Of course, yeah, yeah. Just no stalking with the RV in the RV parks. Uh, yeah, Twitter's fine. Or do we call it X now? Let's say X. The handle is just Chad Davis, my full name. So yeah.
At Chad Davis. Perfect. Awesome. Well, thanks so much. And I will see you soon.
See you, Roman.
Later. For listening in today. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to share and write a review. This is going to help other firm owners just like you find our podcast and get insights into how to grow their firm. Stay tuned.